What's up, guys? Welcome to another guitar lesson masterclass here on Patreon. Thanks, as always, for being here, you guys. So this lesson, this workshop today, live stream, is going to be all about right-hand technique, as you guys probably know. And I got some great questions from you guys, too, this month. So I'm really looking forward to digging in and talking about right-hand technique. I got a lot of questions specifically about that kind of like percussive slapping technique, and so I'm going to cover all kinds of stuff about that today too. I'm going to cover some of the techniques that I've used and sort of, like exercises that I've used to sort of hack like finger control, like sort of like get each finger doing the most it can possibly do. There's also a lot of left-hand techniques, surprisingly, that are sort of where your right hand technique, like a slap or something like that, is dependent on your left hand doing something also to help that technique work. So I'm going to try to go like 360 with all of these techniques so you can really round out some of your knowledge. I also like that I got some questions about some of my particular arrangements that you guys have been working on. And, a lot of times when you're learning a new song, especially when there's a lot of new techniques, you kind of get like, you might get a majority of it, but then there's just certain notes and certain things like that that are, it's like, how's that working? How are you doing that? So I'm going to break down some of those too and have a good time. As always, if you don't see the chat here, there is a live chat going with this live stream. So, if you just open this post in Patreon, all you see is the video. So in the bottom right hand of that video, when you put your mouse over it, you can click the YouTube button. That'll take you to the YouTube page where you can then, if you're logged into your YouTube account, you can join the chat, which is going live here on the right side of the screen. But all right, got the rundown here. Let's go into some questions. So the first question was one I just got, and actually it's the reason I played that intro here, another brick in the wall. Jonathan Rees was asking specifically about, we said on another brick of the wall, the two measure fills between the verses when you hit the note C on the A string. And let me give you, he's asking basically how I'm doing the percussive kind of backbeat that, there's like this drum beat going on there with my right hand, and I'm hitting the backbeat, which is like the 2 and the 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And so one of the tricky things with percussive techniques, also basically like slap bass techniques, is kind of what I'm doing on this song. There's a few different ways. Well, I'll just play the riff first, and then I'll talk about it. So I'll break down what I'm doing here. First of all, I'm in a drop D tuning. So that's basically it's standard tuning, except on the low E string, I tune that down a whole step to a D. And so when I do this like D minor chord right here, which, starting on the high E string is 1st fret, 3rd fret, 2nd fret, then the rest are open. But because I've got that low E string tuned down to a D, it's a nice big fat D minor chord right there. So again, I'm in drop D tuning. In the bass line to this, so I'm kind of hitting this fragment up here, this chord, when I want to, but the main meat of this is that bass line. Kind of going between that, it's either a low D or the D on the 3rd string is your root note, and then you hit on the A string, you hit open 3rd fret, which is A, C, and then back to a D. So, what I'm doing with this arrangement basically is I'm trying to combine 3 or 4 different parts. I'm trying to combine the guitar part, which is just hitting that chord. I'm also trying to combine that bass line. So those two at the same time, but then I'm also trying to incorporate the drum beat, which is basically with that backbeat, that 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So when you try to put those together, it becomes tricky because sometimes with that bass line, you're plucking strings. But then that note, that note comes on a slap. So this is the most difficult part, and I think this is what the answer to your question, Jonathan, is that sometimes, and this is the tricky part about playing that slap technique, that percussive technique, is that sometimes you're going to be just muting and slapping like this, where you don't play any note. All you have to do is mute with your left hand over here, and you don't hear anything. Sometimes you're going to be plucking like, where that's me with my index finger in between one of these slaps. I hook that string and I pull up, almost like with the same motion I'm getting ready to slap with. But it's that one there, that C, and that's the note that he was asking about. I am plucking the note with my slap, which means that I'm actually slapping that one string. Instead of just slapping the strings and muting them, I have to slap it and actually have that C note sustain. And there's a kind of a tricky balance that you have to sort of walk when it comes to slapping like this, because first of all, it's on the bass guitar, you know, these kind of techniques were invented on the bass guitar, you have much bigger strings and they're spaced out way farther apart. So it's a lot easier on the bass to just slap one string with your thumb and not hit other strings. But you know, if you look at the size of my thumb there and see when I slap, I'm slapping like 3 strings generally with my thumb. So what I have to do is I have to mute the strings that I don't want to sound over here. And I do that by basically, instead of just fretting that C note right there, the 3rd fret on the A string, instead of just hitting that straight on, I'm actually hitting it with this finger and I'm muting all of these strings around it. So even if I pluck the low E string, it's not going to sustain a note. Same thing with the D, the G, but that 5th string is nice and clean. If I was just hitting the C, what it would sound like is mute it, nice and clean. Don't mute it with your left hand. Dirty, chaotic. So just, even though this is a right hand technique, this slapping, it depends on you muting with your left hand in order to clean that up and make that nice and clean, nice and musical. And it's a good way to practice is like, you know, so that's just one note. That one right there. Right there. All of these other ones, that's all plucking. And plucking's a little more natural, I think, especially if you're used to finger picking. Then this one is the tricky one because you're slapping. So it's kind of like, you know, some people with that technique, they call it slapping and popping. And it's because you do one of the two. You either slap it with your thumb or you pop it with your finger. And so when I do that, generally, if I'm slapping it, it's because I'm trying to keep that backbeat going. I don't want to interrupt the drummer, which is my right hand, you know, percussive technique. I just want to keep that going, that backbeat. 1, 2, 3, 4. The way to practice that, though, again, since there's only one note that's actually doing this, is to take just whatever you're practicing, and I like to do it with scales or you know, just playing some kind of like some lead or come up with a riff and do all that one technique. So make this riff like all slapping. So do something like that, you know, let's say. Something like that. So we're still in drop D. On the A string, it'll be 3-5. And then on the low string, 3-0. And then that's the 3rd fret of the D string. So this is what I like to do across the board whenever I'm trying to sharpen up like one finger, one note, one technique that I feel like I'm slipping on. I like to make a song, or basically like an etude like we've talked about before. It's a song that sounds musical, but it's designed to drill a technique. And so that's what this riff would be right here. It's to drill the slap technique. And again, this it's crucial that you understand that when you're doing this, the key is to mute with your left hand. Mute all the notes you don't want to play, because otherwise it would sound really sloppy. If you mute properly, also what you'll find is that you're hitting with a certain part of your thumb. And now everyone's thumb is shaped a little bit differently. And so exactly how I'm hitting it might not be exactly how you're hitting it. But there's going to be a part of your thumb that does a better job of like exciting the note. You know, like for me, it's this where my thumb gets a little wider right here next to the joint. There's a little bone there, and you can kind of feel how it's more firm right there than it is, let's say, on the fleshy part of my thumb. I do that popping right there on that bone. So another crucial point with this is that you have to hit the string with your thumb and let your thumb bounce off of it, because if you leave the thumb down, you mute the string. So it has to be like a drum stick hitting a skin of a drum. It's only there for such a small fraction of a second. If you were to lay that stick down and hold it, it would mute the vibration of the drum head. So it's the same kind of thing playing. So you're kind of swatting it like that and letting it bounce off. You're not hitting it and letting it stay. So again, mute with your left hand, and the best way to do that, I think, is to just, you hit the note, but instead of coming down on the string, down on the fret here with your left hand, go kind of touch it with your fingerprint instead of like the tip of your fingertip. Lay it down a little bit more flat, and you'll see what happens naturally, you know, is that you start muting all these strings with just that one finger, you know? Like even with one finger, I can mute every string except the one I want, because the tip of my finger is muting that low E string. I've got the D, G, B, and E strings muted with that one finger, but that A string, it's nice and clean. And you can do that with all your fingers. So on the low string, I've got my finger muting all of these 5 strings here. So, you know, even though it's one note in that arrangement, it's so important that you have to then master all of these techniques to get that one note, because you don't want, otherwise it would sound like the drummer just stopped right there, you know? It's like you can still play it, you can still tap your foot to it, but there's something about that beat continuing to go, that backbeat. then it just keeps it going like that. What if I'm using a thumb pick? Garrison just asked that question. And you know, it's a little bit different. That's a great question with the topic we're hitting right now. Because with the thumb pick, you it's a little bit different, you know. You can still do it. And again, there, I think the key is just finding the right angle to hit it with the thumb pick, because you're still basically slapping. And what I do is, it'll be hard to see on camera, but what I'll show you here is that basically what I do is normally, and I'm gonna try, let me see if I can see this camera and sort of zoom in for you. Right here, when I'm slapping, I'm letting the pick sort of still be in its position like it's about to pick. I'm doing it like that, and I have my thumb bent up. And so when I hit, it's like that. I'm not actually plucking the string with the pick like I normally would, but I'm still slapping. So you can still practice the same way, and it still matters a lot that you're muting with your left hand. Yeah, hopefully that answers your question. And, you know, I think we should do like a live stream 1 month and give me your opinion here just on thumb pick techniques. You know, I think that's a question you guys ask a lot. And if you guys are interested in that, let me know in the comments here, because there's so many techniques that, you know, you can do both, you know, just with the flesh of your thumb, but then the thumb pick offers so many other techniques, but you have to change them a little bit. You know, when you're going just from playing without a thumb pick to using a thumb pick, it opens up new doors, but it also kind of makes you, you know, have to juggle these new techniques. So that's a great question. See, Steve said having the neck pickup on seems helpful in getting more sound out of it. You know, with something like a fingerstyle guitar, like what we're playing now, you know, where you're trying to get the bass line, the drums, the melody, the guitar part, you're trying to combine a whole band's worth of instruments into one guitar. I really like the neck pickup because it's warmer, so especially so that like the balance of the overall song tends to be a little more warmer. The bass has a little more bass in it. The mids have a little more body to them. So I agree with you, Steve. I think the neck pickup is generally the best position when you're going for like that full fingerstyle guitar sound. Great. Well, it sounds like you guys are already excited about doing a thumb pick specific masterclass live stream here. So maybe we'll focus on that next month. Maybe we'll go into all the world of thumb pick. So it's decided. But while we're still here on specifically right hand techniques, and don't be afraid to ask thumb pick questions again, because it's all relevant here. So let's keep digging into more of these right hand techniques. So I'm gonna talk a little bit. This is gonna be one of the things that I found helped me the most with gaining like control over all of my fingers, and I call it like the blues finger technique. And I started messing around with this technique when I was practicing, to basically, because I realized each of my fingers had a different tone and sort of a different personality, and I was trying to figure out which finger sounded the best for what type of playing. and it was pretty interesting. So I'm gonna show you. I'm gonna go to standard tuning though. Let me put this guitar in standard tuning really quick. So basically what I do with this technique, just like how we were doing the slap, just practicing that one technique, like not using it in a context where you're hitting other notes, but you're playing with just that one technique, and you're trying to do it on as many strings as possible. That's the same thing with the the blues finger technique, and basically what it is it's you just play something, and I like to play like you could play anything, literally play a song you already know, but only use one finger at a time. So try to play an entire song with, let's say, your thumb first. So So what you realize when you start doing that is that, okay, I just identified what I can and cannot do with my thumb. Like, I think that's the first thing you start to realize. One of the things that's difficult about playing with only your thumb is that you have to downstroke everything. It's difficult to do an upstroke with your thumb. You can, but you'd have to practice quite a bit with it. To get like a nice soft downstroke and a nice full individual note sound, the thumb is great. And actually, there's quite a few people, like Wes Montgomery being the most famous by far, who only picked with his thumb, one of the most famous jazz guitarists. And I think the reason why that works so well for him is because, well, for one, that's the way he learned, but he got this really nice soft tone. So he did a lot of like octaves, So it could mimic those horn lines and but you get this nice even tone, you get this nice fatness. But again, the reason I'm going over all of this is because when you're playing, when you're practicing, and you're wanting to master all of your fingers, this is the best exercise I've found, like the best practice technique I've found for really driving home all these techniques. Because what you're doing essentially when you're doing this, you play a song, confine it to only one finger at a time, is that you're going to identify what you can't do generally, what you're not comfortable doing. And the reason you're not comfortable doing that is because there hasn't been a musical context where you've had to do that. And I think that's where you find that, if you play a certain song, you play a certain few songs over and over again, you might get good, but you find that all your techniques are based on just those songs. Those are the only techniques you know. So if you even play the same song, but limit yourself to what technique you're allowed to use for it, you can know less songs, but know and learn more techniques from those few songs. So, if you go to, let's say, Baby Please Don't Go. That might be how I normally play it with all my fingers, but if I just do my index finger next, let's say. What I find with my index finger is that you get a nice plucky tone. And I can do downstrokes with my thumbnail. They sound a little more like a pick because I'm using that cartilage from my or whatever from my fingernail. It sounds different on my downstroke than it does on my pick. And you get that nice rake in there. So it's like my index finger has a lot of control in tone, so I like the tone of that. Let me do the furthest away. You do this with all of your fingers. Try to play those songs with all of your fingers, only using one finger at a time. Let me try my pinky. I'm going to try playing it with just my pinky. Let's see. Got to calibrate. So you can see, not as clean as my index finger, but what happens is you do this and you're thinking like, God, starting to get a little bit better, starting to get a little more control. When you go back to playing with all 5 of your fingers again, you realize like, wait, I just used my pinky in a place that I normally don't use my pinky. I just used my ring finger and it sounded better than I normally do. So what's happening is in your mind and your muscle memory, you're creating and you're sort of perfecting this physical map that you have of the strings and where they are. And each of your fingers, I feel like, has its own little sort of like little brain in it that remembers where the strings are if it plays them. And so if you try to do a whole song just with your pinky, the point isn't that you'd ever want to perform the song with just your pinky. The point is it's sort of like drilling on a baseball team, where you don't just play the game over and over again. You don't just play baseball to practice. You practice passing. You practice the weaknesses of each player. You try to train those out of that player. And so each of your fingers is like a different player with a different personality, different strengths, different weaknesses. And you've got to, as like the coach, you've got to go in there and work on each one of those individually. Because then when you go back to it again, you go back to playing a game, you go back to playing a song where the whole team's working together, and suddenly you realize everyone's a little bit better now, so it's a lot more fun. So try that. Be patient with it. Know that the whole point is that you're kind of wanting to sound bad so that you can sound better. You're throwing difficulties at something you already know in order to drill those little nuances. And so try that. I guarantee you're going to be really impressed with the results on that. So that's the one finger or the blues finger approach. And that goes into something as one of the questions Sava asked, and I think he kind of answered his own question but he was asking about doing like a triplet roll with just 2 fingers. So let's say it's like, so this little riff I'm doing right here is just I'm doing it middle index thumb, and it's a D minor shape. You move that up 2 frets, and then you do kind of like a D major shape up, and so it's like, so that's what I'll be playing there. But what you can do is, he's asking about doing that roll, but only using my index finger and thumb. And you watch people like Merle Travis, Doc Watson, they only pick that when they finger pick, they only use 2 fingers for everything. And so they are the masters of this sort of like a banjo roll is what it is, but with 2 fingers. And they can do it incredibly. I also like to do it on, let's say you have a big minor chord. Doing stuff like that, but the key there is that it's a different technique, because with 3 fingers you don't have to move your hand, and every finger has its own string it's designated to. The way to get the right technique when you're just using your index finger is that instead of doing 2 plucks with your index finger, that's what your mind tells you want to do. And if you do it slowly, you end up doing pluck, pluck, thumb, pluck, pluck, thumb. What you want it to feel like, though, is that you're keeping your fingers solid and you're dragging it. So instead of plucking 2 strings, it's almost like you're doing a rake, which is when you keep the finger solid. Instead of doing like pluck and then realigning for a new pluck, you kind of drag your fingers across those strings. And so your hand moves, and you kind of lock your finger, not tightly, but compared to a normal pluck, you kind of lock your finger and drag it. So that's the key to that, and that's a good one, because when you are playing with just 2 fingers, you want to be able to do that freely whenever you want. So practicing it on a triplet roll like that, or doing it on, picking patterns, where you do index, index, thumb, index, index, thumb, index, index, thumb, but going down the strings. If you do it slow, so you do that pattern, index, index, thumb, and then move it down 1 set of strings, do the same thing. Move that down. But it sounds kind of like, you do it fast and it sounds sort of like a waterfall, which sounds a little different than when you do it with 3 fingers. There's just a little bit of a different tone to it, and so it's good to know both ways, and it's excellent as far as just freeing your hands up. Because all of these exercises, and I think the point of any exercise across the board, no matter what, is to drill a technique so that when it's time to perform, it's time to play music, to have fun, to make it sound good, you wanna be able to physically do whatever idea you come up with. And the only way to accomplish that is to be comfortable doing, literally anything you can think of. Anytime you're practicing and you think, I can't do that, it's important to not just give up. Don't get frustrated. Figure out why you can't do it. Figure out what's stopping you physically. It's all a big, sort of physics experiment that's in the way of you having fun on the instrument. And you're the kind of the architect there, trying to make sure that you decode why you can't do it. Sometimes it's just practice. And I think people lean on that too much, though, like practice. I just need to practice. I don't have enough time to practice. But when you do practice, what are you actually doing? Are you practicing memorizing stuff? Are you practicing just finding out the nuts and bolts of how you're playing and where you're kind of like messing your technique up? Like a lot of times I don't move like my hands enough sometimes to do certain techniques because I try to focus so much on economy of motion that I'll realize sometimes I just need to move my hand more. I just need to do more aggressive stuff to get a certain tone. Also, just like with these techniques, when you practice something slow, which you should practice it slow in order to get the right technique, when you get into more intermediate advanced techniques, like the stuff I'm doing here, moving that quickly through things like that, you realize the technique when you play it fast is technically different than a slow technique doing the same thing. So once you sort of master the slow process and you sort of start developing your accuracy and articulation, your muscle memory, you start to realize, like, I have to take this to the next step, you know? Practicing something like if I was doing the if I'm practicing that song like that, when you get to that intermediate or advanced level, you really start to want to say, like, I've got to get dynamics, which is like the intensity in there. In your whole right hand, everything changes. So you see how much more character is in that now than just playing the notes? So I guess the point there is that you can keep advancing, and make sure you're listening to what you play. Make sure you're finding out, not just judging what you play, but finding out what is going on with your technique and what you need to improve and what you need to drill on. And then drill on it. Drill on a specific little detail, and that's the best way to advance through all of this stuff. So that was kind of a long answer to Sava's question, but I think it's really important not just to get like an answer to a question, but sort of understand it in the whole scheme of getting better at guitar and what you're trying to do. Let's see. So Sava had another question. He said, I actually have one about right hand posture. It looks like your posture on your arm is a bit higher rather than hugging the guitar. It'd be great to learn more about the reasoning behind that. So yeah, great question. And good job noticing too that the posture and the direction, the hands approaching the strings and holding the guitar is important. You know, it's very important. Before I go too far into it, again, it's one of those things that you have to realize because everyone's shaped differently and everyone's arms are different sizes, different lengths, their hands are different sizes. It's going to be, I think, always a little bit different for each player. So while what I'm going to say is true for me, and I think it's going to be true as far as the points that I'm making with it, it's important not to just look at like the way I'm approaching the guitar and think I have to do it that way as far as like the exact angles I'm hitting things. It's all about ergonomics with your body shape, your hand shape, your style. Everything should be super comfortable. Nothing should be painful anywhere on your hands, your wrists, your arms, your elbows, your shoulders, neck. Everything should feel good. And if it doesn't, you probably need to adjust something and make it comfortable. But to answer your question, you know, if I were to say like hugging the guitar more like this, where my arm is coming more at an angle, and I'm sort of exaggerating it here, like this, you notice that my hand's shaped like this. When you think of the way the hand is shaped, you can get the most control over 6 strings by reaching like this. And if you angle it too much this way with your arm, then you've got to jut your hand down in this sort of shape, which isn't comfortable. It's bad for your wrist. And you'll see certain people do it who are good guitar players, and they've developed, I think, a way of doing that. Like you look at James Taylor when he plays, and he's got a pretty wicked bend to his wrist when he does it. He also plays very lightly and very articulately. He doesn't do a lot of percussive stuff. He's very much like, you know, that kind of like easygoing sort of fingerstyle. So I don't think it applies too much to that. With me, I find like, you know, take a step back, you go to like classical approach, which is boosting your knee up here. You get a little bench, you get a little stool for your foot down there. And with classical technique, this hand is 90 degrees to the fretboard, this hand is 90 degrees to the strings, and you play like this. And so that's great for your right hand technique, but to me, it doesn't allow you to do a lot of the bluesy stuff that in the rock and roll techniques, the stuff like vibrato, string bending, all of that, playing with your thumb, all of that becomes almost impossible with classical technique. And so the idea behind like the way that I sort of conceptualize it is that I want a bluesy and a a sort of rock and roll blues electric guitar approach to my left hand playing, but I want to take what's good about classical technique with my right hand and apply it also to people like Merle Travis, Doc Watson, who have that great like kind of Chet Atkins, that great style of finger picking. And so the balance is to sort of come down on the strings in a comfortable way, not a total 90 degrees way, not a total parallel to the strings way where you got to bend your wrist, but keep your wrist pretty much straight here and find a good way to do that comfortably. And when you're plucking with your fingers should be going behind your thumb this way. You don't want to have it at an angle where your fingers want to intersect with the motion of your thumb. Your thumb should always pluck around the outside of your index finger, and the index finger should always fall in the pocket there. And so what you end up doing with this, for me, is that instead of like classical technique where your fingers would pluck at a 90-degree angle to the string, they're plucking at a slight angle. So they're plucking kind of like this. When I pluck, I'm plucking with the flesh on my finger. I'm not plucking with my fingernails. I don't use my fingernails to pluck. I use them to swat when I go down, sort of, flamenco style. But I use the flesh always, and I keep my nails really short on my right hand. I don't like the sound of the nails on the strings. If I was playing classical guitar, nylon string guitar, I think fingernails sound good on that. Plus, those strings are a lot softer, so you don't wear your fingernails down. If you're doing all those techniques, classical flamenco techniques, on a steel string, you would just you would wear your fingers down at the first day, So I keep those fingernails nice and short, pluck at a slight angle, thumb around, and again, the bend to my wrist right here isn't extreme. Again, it's not like this. It's just a little bit, and it's comfortable. My wrist here is never sore when I play, and so you want to really pay attention to that. But yeah, so hopefully that answers your question, Sava. And again, everyone's a little bit different, and you play different guitars too, and you find you have to approach the guitar a little bit differently, Like when I let me when I play something like this Resonator, it took me a while to get used to this specific type of resonator, and I know I get a lot of questions about it too, because it's kind of body heavy. The body's way over here now, whereas like instead before it felt like it was over here. Now it's kind of like I'm picking over here on this side. Plus, you get this guard right here, which is this piece of metal right here is designed to prevent you from pushing the bridge down too much and distorting the resonator cone, because you'll mess the resonator cone if you do that, if too much pressure is put on it. And but then it prevents you from having like your normal range of motion with the right hand. And so what I find is I come down even more with this. So see how much more my arm is up? Instead of like this, I'm like this. And so I have to adjust my style, which also means that I pick more towards the ground like this instead of like this, where it's kind of a different technique. It's more like a rounded motion to my swing on my thumb when I normally play. On the resonator, it's more of like a downward. See how much more my angle's down and my thumb's sort of like a different direction? That's one of the main things that you have to, I guess, transition into with resonator guitar as far as right hand approach. And it's kind of a weird thing at first. Plus, you can't palm mute the same way you can normally, where you can just graze the string, you know, because again, you'd be palm muting right up here. So you kind of have to develop that difference too. You can lightly palm mute, but what you don't want to do is over palm mute it and just end up killing the vibration of the string either. Great. Well, I'm glad you guys are liking the questions. These are great questions. Let's see. I've got another one here too. Hopefully that answers your question about like hugging the guitar, Sava. Yeah, let's go back to Steve. Look at this guitar again. Steve said the percussive backbeat on the 2 and 4 had him looking into drum lessons, and that's a great instinct. That is such a good place to look, because when you understand what the drummer's doing, you know, you don't have to learn how to play drums to understand certain beats, you know, and it's really good to know what a drummer would be thinking or what certain beats have a tendency of doing, so that you can kind of practice them on guitar instead of drums. He said, since your style is highly percussive, it'd be helpful to know how you apply percussive to the rhythms, and if there's a certain rhythm beat that are favored for guitar exercises. Yeah, and he's talking about the Smoke on the Water lesson too. But that's you're just right on point there, Steve, for sure. I'm gonna go. Let's see what tuning to put this in. I'm just gonna go standard. Yeah, so you know what I like to think about with the drum beats, and I do a lot of times I won't just practice a drum beat necessarily, like look up like drum lessons. I've done that, you know, quite a bit, but what I like to do the most is pick some of my favorite songs that are very rhythmic, like you know, especially like James Brown songs, like P-Funk, Parliament songs, really nice, just like good funky grooves, like. And it doesn't have to be just like funk music, but I think like music that is beat driven is the best music to practice this to, is really listening to like what is the groove, and then you kind of realize that there might be something like, you know, something like that. You realize when you're playing, you can break up the guitar into different drums. Like let's say the bass drum is that thumb slap, and then the snare drum is the percussive slap. And then, you know, a lot of times they'll be riding something like the hi-hat. Just play along to the song like this, trying to not just play what the drummer's playing, but when you get into the rhythms, the actual rhythms, when you're just playing percussion or just playing drums, you realize when you get good at it, you can't even hear your part anymore. It melts into the drums. And so you don't want it to be like, I want my part to be heard. You want your part to blend into the whole sound of the whole song. And once you start doing that, you realize, okay, now I'm feeling the rhythm, and I'm becoming part of the rhythm. And that's what you really want when you're playing that percussive style, when you're mimicking a drummer, because their job there is not to play notes, not to control the harmony. It's there to put more impact on the rhythmic tendencies of all the other instruments, to create this underlying heartbeat and this underlying pulse that drives the melody, and it drives the harmony, and it drives the song, and it also indicates changes in the song with the rhythm, so that you can say like, oh, this sounds interesting now. The song just changed. Maybe the rhythm got harder, maybe it got louder, maybe it got softer, maybe it went just down to the bass drum. And so this is all part of learning how to use rhythms and use percussion to your advantage. And when I say percussion, I'm talking about your right hand. I'm talking about those slaps. So you see how I just changed that? This is an A minor, just kind of a blues A minor, D minor, and then like F major, E, back to A. So it'd be like, you got the bass drum here, 1, 2, 1, 2. You got the snare, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3. Then you got that cymbal, like the hi-hat. But when you, let's say, make that beat into music, there's the bass. And then the snare is that backbeat. And then that cymbal part that was, that will just become sporadic notes you hit in that chord fragment. And get some slaps. Take that a step farther, and when you add the lead in, or we're going to talk about this next, you still try to keep the beat going as much as possible. And again, this is when things get way into the advanced level, but I'll show you what I'm talking about. All right, so the like doing that, like I was just improvising that, you know, based on that chord structure there, and playing the lead over it. But to me, the feeling of the main thing you want to do is you want that feeling like the song is still going to continue through those parts. It doesn't mean that you have to hit every bass note. Because if you hit a bass line, so that time the bass line when I was playing lead was just A. So I simplified the bass line down to one note, but you didn't really notice because I was playing other things. I was playing chords, I was playing lead, and I kept that backbeat going. And then one passing tone going to the D. So it creates a story like this bass line is still going. Just back to the A and now the F. So I'll use this technique a lot too. Let's say I want to get more intricate, which will make it more difficult for me to play that backbeat. I will wait until something like the turnaround right there, and I'll take the backbeat out, and what I'll do is I'll bring the dynamics down. And so it sounds like, wait, The drummer isn't stopping because the drummer can't play it. The drummer's stopping because it's musical, and this is about to then what they call crescendo, which means a raise in dynamics back to the slap part. So notice the slap. No slap, then here. So what I do there, I go on the F, I do it nice and gentle. And then when I go to that E, I start pounding that bass line a little bit loud. On the quarter notes now, and I bring the chord up in dynamics. And then bring the slap back. So you can see, even though I'm not keeping the slap consistent, I'm bringing it in and out at musical points. And I'm using those different points strategically to tell a story with the song. But from the player's perspective, from your perspective of juggling all of these different, especially right-hand techniques, you're doing this not only in a way to make the song more interesting, but you're doing it in a way to where you don't have to play those backbeats sometimes. You can do more intricate lead work or more intricate chord work or techniques because you're not having to slap. But the key is do it at musical points, and that's when it makes it like feel good from the listener's perspective, because again, you're taking them on a journey, you're telling a story with the song. The song isn't just, point A, point B, you hit all the right chords, you didn't hit any wrong notes, something like that. It's just that you're taking them on a journey, you're telling them a story, and that's always the kind of like the gold. So let's see. Seeing if there's any questions here. And so what you can do to practice, though, one of the most difficult things I just did in that is to play the lead while keeping that backbeat going. And it's difficult to play lead a lot of times anyways. You're always kind of wanting to stretch your technical limits when you're playing improv. And the key to doing that, again, is to let's take a step back from the whole arrangement and let's just drill the part that's difficult. And so that's always the way to practice. And so let's keep that beat. Once you get comfortable with that, let's just focus on that backbeat. 3. And now play some lead, but just make sure that backbeat's still going. You can tell I can't even help but put those root notes in there, because let's just say you're doing the same thing, and now while you're doing this, you're playing lead, just every once in a while hit the root note of the chord that you're playing on. So this is A minor. D. And I'm just hitting the open strings. A. F, here with my thumb. E. D. E. A. D. D. F. It's one of my favorite ways to end a song. I learned that from Tal Farlow is a great jazz guitar player back in the day, and also Doc Watson does it. Get the palm of your finger. You do that at the end. All right, let's see if you have any more questions. I'm going to go back to some more beats here, but I want to make sure you guys don't have any questions about what I'm saying. It's part of the groove. Oh yeah, Steve's saying, good explanation, thanks. I think the coordination, making a note on a pop or slap is a challenge, and once it's intuitive, it's definitely a challenge to do that at first. And the main thing too, you know, you kind of have to be looking for that balance between when you're too aggressive with the slap and when you're not aggressive enough, you know? And I think when you first start playing an instrument, or when you're used to playing a certain way, and then you're like, well, now I'm like slapping the strings, I'm hitting the strings, there can be a tendency to sort of not do it hard enough because you're afraid of like, you know, slapping the instrument or something. The main thing is you're never slapping the guitar, you're only slapping the strings. You don't want to like hit the guitar necessarily when you're doing that type of technique. And the key to it, I think the hardest thing at first is to let your finger bounce back off. There's kind of a ha, ha. It's like imagine doing it to a hot skillet or something, where you don't want to put it on there. You put it on there for more than a heartbeat, it's going to burn you, you know? So practice it like that. And the slap, the pluck here, or the pop, the key there is to keep your finger in like a hook, and you're not plucking, you're not moving your finger, you're kind of just holding your finger in place. Because when you get the pop and the slap together, you're kind of in a position like that with your finger, one going down, and when you're in the pop, when you're in the slap, your other finger is getting in position to come up. So you know, like that. So they kind of trigger one another. You could also do those pops with two fingers. Kind of stuff like that. So again, it takes some practice, but be patient with it. And you know, I think it helps too to learn on an electric. It's just easier, I think, at first with the strings, with the lower action, that kind of stuff. Make sure you're muting again, too. I can't stress that enough with that sort of thing. Make sure you're muting with your left hand, or it's going to sound like a mess, even if you're doing it correctly with your right hand, with the slapping and popping like that. But yeah, so, you know, going back to like Steve talking about different beats, and I kind of went off in explaining, you know, kind of from the ground up how I might take a beat like that from listening to the drums and dissecting that bass, snare, hi-hat, you know, and then turning it into that. Turning it into the whole song in that style, because that's sort of the process I go through with arranging. And I got a question, I think from, let's see, yeah, from Garrison. When you're learning a new piece, do you focus on getting the bass part of the groove solid before you add the melody, etc.? It really depends on the arrangement. And I think you said, let's see, example, Jesus on the main line. So let me think. I'm trying to remember the. So with that song, and I'm going to learn it here for you. I'm familiar with it, and I played it I think once years ago, but so I'm going to do it in A, and it's like a gospel song. And so what I would do if I was learning this, because this has this kind of like sort of like the gospel vibe is like 1, 2, 3, 4, kind of like imagine a choir singing it and clapping, doom 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 doom. Kind of like this vibe, like the kind of worship, having fun, clapping, feeling good sort of gospel vibe. So that's sort of the rhythm I would intuitively feel. That hand clap vibe being the main thing. And then there's always this like... it's so groovy with this kind of gospel, you know, is that there's a big swing to it. There's a lot of syncopation. And so what I would learn there, the most important part, I think, of a gospel song, basically in general, is you want to know the melody, and you want that to be sort of the key focus of the song. You have to, of course, also know the chords. So let's go. So, and then you go to the D. Jesus on the main line, and then repeat. I think that's goes to that minor there. Up and call him up it goes to like the E, I mean the A to the E backs. So I would be thinking, so that's what I would be doing then. So that would be my next step then is let's get the melody now that we got it. We got the chord changes. I'm going to try to think of how I can keep that pace going, the rhythm, play the melody as if that's like the lead gospel singer and everyone's clapping behind that person. And so right there, I'd be adding harmonies. Like that might be where the gospel singer has a little like echo there. So instead of it being like, that would be one singer. So this would be one singer and then a chorus. Get those harmonies in there. And then maybe a walk up on the bass line. So I'm hitting the root note for the A. And then that would be the bass player sort of doing those fills in between. The good thing about that, as far as balancing it all on the fretboard, is there's a nice big break in the phrase. So I don't have to play a melody and bass line at the same time. It's a one-note bass line while the melody's going. And then like maybe that, or another walk up in that break between the vocal part. That's what I'd want there, is instead of it just going when it goes to that F sharp minor, I'd want to go, that's sort of like a big part of the song in the kind of gospel arrangement. So that'll be the trickiest part so far, because I'm going to do a walking bass line during a harmonized melody part. And maybe I love adding a little blues there at the end of one of those like very major kind of like, this is all in the major pentatonic, but then if I add that bluesy at the end, it's just like, that's what makes it feel good, you know? So, all right, so I'm kind of telling you what I'm thinking along this whole time. And again, beat. So there's the bass player. If I was just gonna vamp on that. And vamp, the term vamp, if you don't know it, is when you kind of just play one chord and you just hold on it musically. Okay, now I'm gonna start the melody. So second time around, I'm going to add some extra fills in there. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to improvise over those chord changes. So the A, the D, and the F sharp. I'm going to have to move down here with my lead to play the F sharp, but everything else is an open string. So all the other chords, A, D, E, I can play anywhere on the fretboard because my bass note is going to be open. So I can be up here. Yeah, so that's great. You know, that's perfect going through something like that, because that's exactly how I would approach, I think, any song is first to sort of define in my mind what each component of the song is going to do and what it should do in the song. And with this, like a gospel arrangement, I wanted to feel like that feeling, like that good feeling, like you're listening to a great gospel choir doing it. A lot of funk, a lot of that loose sort of swing beat, that kind of clapping vibe, and then the harmonies that join in during those moments that really add the excitement of that kind of group feeling in a gospel choir. And then the only thing I didn't do here that I would normally do on an arrangement is that if it was an arrangement of a song, like let's say that Another Brick in the Wall Part 2, where there's actually riffs that I want to make sure to play, I would learn those riffs, and it would be important to make sure that I incorporate those riffs that really define the song into the arrangement. So, you know, like that bass line, the certain guitar riffs, you know, that kind of stuff in Another Brick in the Wall. You want to make sure you hit those and that you include those in your arrangement, because that's what the listener is expecting to hear. And if you do that, you know, it's like if you hit those little spots in the song that you're covering that really give the listener the feeling like they're actually listening to the recording and enjoying the parts of it that they enjoy when they listen to it, that's when you get like those goosebump feelings, like, man, like you pulled it all off, you know. And then that one arrangement on guitar, like, sounds like I'm listening to the song. Like, you can hear the words, you hear the guitar parts. It could be a drum part, it could be a bass part, you know what I mean? You just want to hear it really bad. And so that's the only thing I didn't do in that arrangement, because it's basically, you know, I can't think of like a solid like arrangement of that song specifically that I'm saying like it needs this guitar part or this riff or something like that. A lot of times those gospel songs, it's more about the melody and the groove that really sticks with you. But man, what great questions. Really enjoyed this live stream with you guys. I hope you guys got a lot out of it. And well, I guess next month we're going to be focusing all on thumb picks. And so I'll be, you know, when I post that, or if you have questions about thumb picks that you want to make sure that I cover, be thinking about it. You can message me directly through Patreon, or when I post the date for the next live stream, I'm going to ask on that, you know, what questions do you guys have? So you'll be able to ask me then as well. But yeah, keep practicing, you guys. I'm loving it. Keep sending me videos if you guys feel like it, so that I can check out what's going on with your techniques. And awesome. You guys have a great rest of your weekend. Happy Memorial Day. Keep rocking.